Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLNS Rugby podcast. As over the coming months, we have a jam-packed coverage of club and international game, as well as the Lion Series and World Cup. But tonight we will look at things with a bit of a twist. With the top 14 returning this weekend, we're going to look at all things French rugby. It is undoubtedly flourishing across all levels. But what is the reason? Have the FFR got it right? Or is it the true buy-in that we see from the French fans? With me to discuss it all are two respected French rugby writers. Firstly, making his third appearance on the show is the returning Illtud Dafydd. Illtud, very welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
It's good to have you. And joining him is a debutant who is also well known for people in the French rugby media bubble, Paul Eddison. Paul, it's great to have you on.
Thanks very much for having me.
It's great to have you, lads. There is an elephant in the room, a massive elephant in the room when it comes to French sport at the moment. That is, of course, the Olympics. Stade de France was packed out for the rugby, in which Ireland did well, the athletics, in which Ireland did even better. I'll start with yourself. Is there a bit of sporting boom at the moment in France, do you think?
Yeah, the Olympics were special. Paris isn't really a sporting city to a certain extent. Yeah, Roland Garros happens there, international sporting matches happen there, but you don't feel it when you're there. When these big events and big games are on, you don't really feel it across the whole city because it just is so big. But during the Olympics, you couldn't escape it. You still can't escape it now with the Paralympics just about to start underway. And yeah, it was a special 2 weeks, and sport was right at the heart of it. The rugby sevens helped a lot. It followed the narrative with Antoine Dupont winning gold and stuff like that. It was a shame the women couldn't do something similar because I felt that they were maybe slightly in a better place than the men's just before the start of the tournament. But when it comes to general French sport, I'm not sure if it really is in that great of a place, especially with football. The Ligue 1 TV rights only got given right at the end before the season started, and that was in a very difficult place, and they expected much more money than what they got. So French football, domestic football, isn't really in a great space. Even though my favourite team, Red Star Football, just promoted to the second division. But yeah, so I wouldn't say that, but we'll see. With any Olympics, you don't really see the impact sporting wise straight away, really, regarding participation and talent. You probably see it in a decade or so. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of talent comes through following this Olympics to an Olympics like we'll maybe see in Brisbane in 2020, in 12 years time or 8 years time.
8 years time.
Yeah. It's undoubtedly a massive factor. Even, I mentioned on Twitter a couple of times the lower, even though they weren't medalists, that the runners in Ireland had the 4x400 meters, it was probably the biggest story despite not winning a medal. I think that says something as well. And it's those success stories that are massive. And one of them, as Illtud mentioned, was of course Antoine Dupont adding a gold medal to his already growing list of heroics. And Paul, do you think we'll ever see a successful domestic season? Like, I mean, maybe he has to go and play League On and win that as well, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly a few jokes going around that he would have to take on the Tour de France next year to end the wait for a French winner, because it feels like, obviously, since the disappointment of the World Cup, everything he's touched has turned to gold. And even during those Olympics, where there were times where you thought, okay, they've dropped him to a bench role and a cameo role, but then it came to the final and he came off the bench and basically not won it single-handedly, but first touch he runs 70 meters and sets up a try, and then he scores two more. And especially the first of those, which was the moment that, right, they're not going to lose from here. They're now up 2 scores with a minute to go. And you think this is the moment the Olympics have really kind of taken flight. And that's Dupont, who's risked so much, because as great as he is, if that had failed, if they'd gone out to Argentina on that opening Thursday and they'd have been out of medal contention before the opening ceremony, there would have been a lot said. I mean, we see enough about kind of how popular he is with some and not so much with others because of the coverage he gets. But yeah, you look at his last season and exceptional, like man of the match in the final of the Champions Cup, man of the match in the final of the top 14, played 3 World Rugby Sevens series events, won 2 of them, got a bronze in the other, and then he goes to the Olympics and wins gold, scoring 2 tries and making another in the final, beating Fiji, who've never lost. It's yeah, it'll take some topping.
the word hero gets bandied around a lot, but it really is the case. And Illtud, you're going to jump in there.
Yeah, I just think if I don't know, this is total speculation, but if France go unbeaten in the November Test series, he could potentially be the first ever men's player to win the sevens and 15s World Player of the Year, couldn't he? Really?
But they shouldn't really, because he didn't play 6 Nations. But at the same time, like, it's Antoine. Like, you know what I mean? I wouldn't really hold it against them. We were having this conversation the other night, and it's probably not one to keep going on about. But like, you look at the list, you're like, he'd probably still be shortlisted if they have a good November. So, you know, why not? You never know. But before we move on to kind of the fluffy stuff and how great everything France is in France, the rubbing of their bellies, I suppose, there is a bit of political and off-field turmoil going on behind closed doors. And I'll let you start on that one. It's bound to leave an impact in the coming weeks. So you might just take us on that.
Yeah, so it all started the day after France beat Argentina quite emphatically in the first test in Mendoza, when a video was released on social media of fullback Mervyn Jamley making racist comments. That was shortly followed, like hours after, by the arrest of second row Hugo Jean Oradou and Oscar Jegou, who had allegedly carried out sexual violations on a woman the night after the game. That's a legal situation that's still ongoing. And then a few weeks later, a member of the France under-18 squad was swept away by waves while he was in a recovery session in South Africa, and his body is still yet to be found. It's Mehdi Narjisi, whose father played hooker for Agen. So these three incidents have put despite the success the Olympics has had, France have put a bit of a cloud over the coming season of French rugby, and they even put an even bigger cloud on what's to come in, I think, October, with the French Federation's presidential elections, and a lot of fingers being pointed at Florent Grill's running of the show, especially by Narjisi's parents. And Paul, I don't know what you think of it, but I just think the context of French rugby has totally changed over the past few weeks.
It's quite
it's
quite a big one, Paul. I might let you just lead on from that with election season and all that. It's probably a choppy couple of weeks ahead, is it?
yeah, certainly. I think it's hard for people in other rugby countries to really understand the kind of the political side of things, because presidential elections, it does sound more like, yeah, you're talking Trump Biden or Trump Harris or whatever, than I can't even think what the RFU equivalent would be, or the IRFU, or kind of any other countries. But we spent a long time, whereas Bernard Laporte, who was obviously very good at kind of running his campaigns, and then Florian Grill took over, who's come from a slightly different background. I have to say, I think with these incidents, I mean, particularly the two in Argentina, he came out immediately after the Melvin Jaminet thing and was very strong in what he said. And I think it's been handled as well as you can for something which is obviously pretty grim. Even the other day, Grill has basically said that he won't play for France again, or it's hard to imagine, while Grill is president, he would ever play for France again, as well as being banned for, I think it's 34 weeks. And then, yeah, I mean, the sexual assault allegations and the case that's ongoing, we'll see. That sounds like it should have the latest developments are imminent, I believe. So what exactly that will happen, I don't know, but I think it's maybe making people realize that there's work to be done on what is acceptable for elite sport and celebrations post-match, and the famous troisième mi-temps, as they call it. And then, yeah, the incident in South Africa, listening to the family talk about that is just absolutely heartbreaking, and it's clear that there's quite a lot that has not been done that should have been, or the kind of the level of accompaniment from the coaching staff and the wider staff was not as it should have been. So that's just an incredibly sad situation. How much of that falls at the feet of Florian Grill, I'm not really sure. I think that he's handled himself pretty well, but there's an election coming up, and there are people who would like to take over. I know Didier Cordonnier, who was a great centre of the 1980s, is kind of pushing his case in conjunction with Guillaume Guirado, the former captain, which would be an interesting one. I'm not sure who else is going to put their name forward. I know Serge Blanco had a big interview this week, which I've not had a chance to catch up on yet, but he's usually there or thereabouts. But yeah, it's certainly something that's going to be used in the kind of electioneering and in the battles to see who will take over, and it is an important role. It has far-reaching implications. So as much as it might feel like a Franco-French affair, it probably is of interest to people outside because it can have big impacts on what happens, especially now that Laporte is out of the picture to a certain extent.
No, understandably, especially when France are, like, we talk about how rugby is probably controlled by a couple of nations. France are front and center of that at the moment. You know, they are the biggest piece of the pie. And even, I think it was 2 years ago, Champions Cup put up their viewership stats, and the most watched game was Toulouse against Munster. That wasn't a final, that was a pool stage game. It's because it was on free to air in both countries. Like, that's what French rugby is at the moment. It is the sexy product, and that's what we're going to kind of base the conversation on, because when you talk about the likes of Antoine Dupont and Toulouse, and there's loads of listeners here who would have been devastated as they became European champions for the 6th time, understandably, because we've a strong Leinster listener base. They also won their 23rd top 14 title, which is remarkable. And Paula, I'll start with yourself, because even taking the politics, the rules, the regulations, the budgets, and all that aside, we're probably witnessing rugby's latest dynasty, and it is quite something to watch even as they do it.
Yeah, it is. There's already kind of the debate starting in France over whether this is the greatest Toulouse team, which, as you say, with 23 titles. And I think people forget a little bit the period like 03 to 05 when they won 2 European titles and were a Rob Howley, Clermont-Ferrand incident away from perhaps a third in succession. In the 90s, they had 4 in a row in the top 14 and won the inaugural European title. So they've had some incredible teams, and that's before you go back to pre-professionalism. But in terms of what they can do at the moment, there's so much talent throughout the team. Obviously, they have Dupont, who's kind of this absolute superstar, and Tamac coming back, but they absolutely dominate the French side. And I mean, they've barely brought in anyone for the last 2 seasons, so it's not a case of buying. I mean, they've obviously brought in people, and they have a very well-oiled recruitment system where they spot people who they think will make a big impact. And someone like Dupont, who was 19, 20, I think, when they signed him, but they already knew that he was 100% going to be the superstar. They brought in Cheslin Colby when he was something of not an oddity, but he was playing sevens and a bit for the Stormers, but he wasn't even on the radar of South Africa. And perhaps if they don't sign him, he never plays 15s for South Africa. And they also have the advantage that you get, I don't know if it's still the same, but it used to be at 200,000 extra on the salary cap for every French national player you have. And obviously, the more of those you have, the more money you have to play with. And then you look at, especially last season, and it was also a case, I think, 2021, I think, they were able, even when the big guns are away, to play at a level where they're winning games with basically reserve players. They went to Montpellier and they won. They went to Lyon, I think, and they won. And they're taking these guys from this mostly 3rd or 4th choice players who are going out and performing. And then you look at someone, for example, there's a guy called Mathis Castro Ferreira, who played for the under-20s last year and wasn't in the Toulouse squad in the big knockout games. He just missed out, but he finished their top scorer in the league for the season, and he's 19 or maybe 20 now, and he's going to be incredible. But he's got to try and get in ahead of Jack Willis, who they did pick up very smartly, a bit like the Black King who won last year. But then Willis, Cross, Jolanche, who's coming back, Alexandre Roumain, who's obviously fantastic in the Champions Cup final, and suddenly it's just like that's 4 or 5 guys who are incredible. So they really have built up a lot of depth, and all those young guys, when they step in, just seem to be able to step up. They all play in the same system. They all train together. It's not quite the Leinster, you go through the schools and everyone who plays the Leinster way, but it is still the same. They know that this is how Toulouse play. It's thinking on your feet. It's making sure that you keep the ball alive, and it's not structured, but it is still within a structure that they understand.
And I'd love to sit here and talk about the je ne sais quoi element of Toulouse for hours and hours, but we do want to kind of touch on we're I suppose the boring stuff, but the technical stuff as well, Illtud. And like what some people often overlook when the online discourse starts is you can't compare this Toulouse team to say Toulon or even past Toulouse sides, because although they're rich, there is the salary cap, there is the GIF rules, as Paul mentioned. You kind of have the leniency, I suppose, with producing so many French players. How exactly though have Toulouse assembled such a squad and continue to assemble such a juggernaut squad amidst these restrictions, even if you can call them restrictions for a club like Toulouse?
Uh, there's a saying in Welsh which means the end of the song is the coin, which literally means like you need money really. And what Toulouse do have is financial backing in Peugeot and Airbus. Everyone knows what Peugeot and Airbus do. They are multi-billion, multinational corporations. So when you've got that as your base, it helps. And then something that Paul mentioned earlier was that the recruitment, and that's not signing Blair King on. Yes, it helps. But what it is being located as the big city in the southwest. If you forget Bordeaux for a second, anyone who plays rugby in that area knows Toulouse exists. If you go on holiday in the summer in the southwest of France, you're going to walk into a kid wearing a Toulouse shirt with probably number 9 Dupont on the back right now. A few years ago, it was probably number 11 Vincent Clerc. So they've always had this presence in that area. And what that means is when guys growing up playing in the Pyrenees, like Anton Dupont, like Julien Marchand, like Cyril Bailly, if or when Toulouse come knocking, if you're at the age of 12, 13, 19, 20, 21, you go. Your head's turned, you go. Someone like Paul Coste, a centre who's coming through now, I think Paul might be able to correct me, I think his dad played for Clermont. And you think, well, he's going to play for Clermont as well. Like what Damien Penaud did with, like you're built in that sort of area, but no, Toulouse came knocking and you have to go because they are Toulouse. So they have that attraction within France and they know they have that. It's a well-run club. From my personal view as a journalist, I think it's the best run club in France and maybe anyone I've worked with in Europe, definitely. Just the way they react with you, just the way how quickly they react to emails. When you ask for interviews, there's always an option. When you meet them, they're always happy to meet and speak to other people. They put you in contact with the right people. Even if you want to speak to a former player, they're like, yeah, don't worry, we can sort that out for you. It's just a well-oiled machine from top to bottom, east to west, left to right, how you want to do it. And it's only going one place, and that's potentially 7th Champions Cup title and probably 24th Boucle de Brenos.
That's the one thing that, as much as I do believe they'll be thereabouts, I don't think they've done back to back. And I know Paul mentioned the Rob Howley moment, the Pochettino moment, which, listen, you can take that in isolation, but geez, it's hard to bet against them though at the same time. And even Paul, like we mentioned Toulon, for instance, or Clermont, who were great teams 10 years ago. French rugby is an entirely different enterprise than it was 10 years ago. You look at like shift rules and salary cap, even just look at that Toulouse team. Yeah, they got Kinghorn, but like it's nearly all French internationals. It's probably more self-sufficient than not just anywhere else in Europe, anywhere else in the world. It's probably rugby's purest product at the moment.
Yeah, there's certainly a case that they seem to be able to just kind of develop and then as we touched on, it's the little extra touches they can bring in, but they have so many players coming through that. I mean, last season they were winning games even without Dupont, which used to be the issue because how do you go and get anyone to come and back up Dupont? Because not only is he incredible, but he's also, he's going to play every big game. So someone like Sébastien Bizzi, who used to be there, who was a very good scrum half in his own right, wanted to go somewhere else, and then they couldn't attract the kind of the guy that you need as a backup. But yeah, I think it's so good to watch. So everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to get involved. And it is very sustainable in some ways. I mean, they've at Espoir level, Crabos, and all the different age group levels in France, they're either winning or they're in finals. They're consistently kind of performing at the highest level. I mean, we obviously mentioned Mehdi Nargissi very sadly. He was one of the stars of one of the age group teams last year. I was quite excited to see him for those under 18s because by all accounts he was an absolute budding superstar. So that's just, as well as being a human tragedy, a really sad from a playing perspective as well, because it would have been really exciting to see what he could do. But they have, a lot of very, very talented young players coming through. And I'm not saying they're going to win a 7th this year because we saw how hard Leinster pushed them in the final. They've struggled against Leinster in the past. They've had teams who've caused them lots of trouble. But also, so inevitably you would take the field. But if they come and go and win in, was it will be Bilbao or Cardiff? I can't remember this year's final, but Cardiff. If they're winning in Cardiff, then I also wouldn't be stunned.
That's understandable. And like, Illtud, you look at the entire league, you look at Pro D2, you look at it all, like La Rochelle, it's easy to forget they won the last two Highland Cup titles. And we do forget that at times because Toulouse won it back and they won the sixth and no one has gotten past four. And like, it feels like at every level, we'll talk about this in a minute, even down to the 13th, 14th place teams are stronger than anywhere else. And there's more support. Granted, I remember Leon played Connacht earlier of the year and there was about 500 people plus 2 dogs at it. But still, it's just such an interest in France at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I just, like, hypothetically speaking, but if they had won the World Cup, I would have loved to see what that would have had even more of an impact on rugby in the country. Bordeaux-Bègles announced this week they've got 17,000 season ticket holders. I haven't done the exact maths, but that's more than most capacities of any stadium in World Club Rugby. And the stadium holds 32,000, but 28,000 at the moment because they're doing works. 17,000 season ticket holders. There's probably some Premier League clubs that don't even get that. And Premier League football is the biggest sport product in the world, arguably. So yeah, it's just amazing to see, and being able to see it week in out, being able to cover it, being able to speak to people, being able to be around it, like it's just it is pretty cool. And yeah, may long it continue, and may other leagues and maybe other clubs try and not copy and paste, but follow a bit in the footsteps.
Absolutely. And I want to move off the top 14 for a minute because as great and all as it is, and really exciting season coming up, it's not the only thing that France are getting right. The women's game, the lower tiers, the sevens, there is an Antoine Dupont factor. There's no doubt about that in their medal success. But like I look at that French women's team, for instance, and if not for England's unprecedented dominance, they'd probably be this generation's heroes, because you have to remember, even 5 years ago, French men's rugby wasn't in a great place. I'll start with yourself, Ilza, on this one. What do you think the FFR are doing in the women's game that's keeping them so far ahead of kind of the best of the rest in the Six Nations? Because there is England, there's France, and then there's the next four.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. When you sent over those questions, and it just got me thinking. And I think they've got about 80 or so semi-pro players who get paid by the federation, also club, in a hybrid sort of way, who play week in, week out in a 10-team league, which has been restructured so many times in the past decade, and hopefully now they're settled with it. It's the federation that run it, and like the competition, unlike the top 4 teams, run by a separate independent body who also run the Pro de Deux. And yeah, they've got a big player pool, because within those 10 teams, they aren't just all in the south and southwest. There's in Rennes in Brittany, up in Lille, pretty much on the Belgian border, all the way down to Toulouse, who are 9-time champions, or Montpellier, 8-time champions, and Bordeaux won it last year as well, to put the cat amongst the pigeons. So there's competition there, and there's a massive playing pool, and there's good talent as well, because yeah, there just is. And yeah, it's a shame for me, from personally, that it's not broadcast more. The final is broadcast on state television, which is pretty cool to see, but it would be nice to be able to have, I don't know, put a game a week on. But one thing what they did do last year was put games, host games at men's grounds. So Clermont had 6,000 at one of their games, and I think Toulouse also had the same sort of number at a game at Anas Valence. So that's a positive note. But yeah, I think the next step would definitely be broadcasting, a bit like what the success that the PWR get in England.
It's scary to think if they do get that level of exposure where French women's rugby would be, because even like I know it's not the reason that English rugby is so far ahead, but the broadcasting is just makes you think, reminds you of how much further ahead they are. And you see how Irish, don't get me wrong, some of Ireland's best players are great players in that league, but it is a step above as well. And one thing that stood out this summer in particular, Paul, is the Pro D2. And like, it's a great pathway for young players, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely phenomenal as a breeding ground. But you look at the standard of signings that the Pro D2 are able to bring in, and that's, I mean, if you're a cynic, you'd say it's not feasible, but it is. That's the thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think where people in their mind, when they think of France, they think of Bujalal, Lorenzetti, these guys who are obviously pumping in loads of money, which Bujalal used to, although ironically was not quite as rich as some of the really, really rich guys there. But the strength of it is really the TV deal, which is with Canal Plus, which kind of dwarfs just everything else any other country can kind of compare with. And where those smaller or those second division teams benefit is that it's a deal which is done not just with the top 14 clubs, it does also include the Pro D2. And so the Thursday night, you've always got one standout Pro D2 game, and then on the Fridays, all the rest of them, and people are watching those. And there's money that's being pumped into the second division, which means that even clubs like someone like Aurillac, who's been in the Pro D2 for a decade plus, and it's not the middle of nowhere, but it's not exactly a huge town. There's not any reason that a kind of a professional outfit should be able to succeed there, and yet they are solidly where they are every year. And obviously, it's great coaching and good signings, and they're probably one of the best ones in terms of international signings. They've got Dutch guys, they've got guys from all sorts of different places, but also they have a security blanket coming in that they know they have a certain level of money, which you compare to someone like Bedford in England or the AIL teams or something like that. You just can't possibly compare because they're able to invest at a completely different level, which is why you end up with George North and Courtney Laws and Johnny May and whoever else who's heading out to what they do. And you think, oh, is that a waste? You think, well, actually, the standard of rugby is good. You're going to packed out grounds, like people are watching on TV. Sure, there might be a world where you think you could be doing something else, but I don't know. I can see the appeal if you're comparing that to going to play 6 games in Japan in the 4th division or going to play in the States. I can see why people would do it, and it's not necessarily just the money, even though obviously the money certainly helps. But I think there is a lifestyle value to it, which can't be kind of overlooked as well.
No, absolutely. And like, I spoke to Alex McHenry at the start of last year, who was at Dax at the time, and he spoke about, like, it kind of came as a shock to him. He spoke about playing a game in, I believe it was in Biarritz, and they traveled through Bayonne or vice versa, and fans just there waving their flags to remind them that, there is that rivalry there. And like, it's so fickle and it's so unnecessary, but it just shows the level of interest in a league. And like, the fact that it's second tier, it doesn't matter. It's the only thing that kind of it comes close to is the championship in England, where it's the only second tier league that feels like it could be main event as well. And then you got these signings, Courtney Laws. How much interest is that going to bring? Because Courtney Laws, in all reality, is probably a favourite to be on that Lions tour. I think we can say at this moment in time, if he's fit. So that's going to bring a huge amount of interest as well. And like, it's the breeding ground as well, element Illtud, isn't it? Because like, a lot of good players come through the Pro D2 and they earn their stripes. You think of props and the likes of those positions, the tougher positions. But it's an unbelievable standard to have that opportunity to do it in, and that just breeds success from there, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is a long season. Like you play 30 games, so it is a slog. Ronan O'Gara likes to kill the top 14 in marathon. I like to pull an Ironman just because it just is this like intensity. And you mentioned there being a breeding ground. Someone like Thomas Ramos spent a year on loan at Colomiers when he was at Toulouse, when he was younger. La Rochelle have sent a hooker, or front rower, Sasha Udumi, out on loan to this season. Yeah, and it's a special league to follow and to watch. And you see the big thing for me is packed out stadiums. Like when you compare it to the financial options, the carrots that are on offer elsewhere in the world, as a pure rugby product, and I think as a life experience when you really do enjoy rugby, it's special. Like Jordan Tafour, who was Lyon's captain last year, Samoa international at last year's World Cup, has signed for Nice, who just got promoted to it. Probably he's wearing a nice wedge, but he's going to be living in the Côte d'Azur, which most people want to live on. And yeah, he always wants to play rugby, and that's the focus. But you have to kind of sell the whole package. And Courtney Lawes is going to breathe. It's a very different sort of place. Snows there in winter, very cold, very, very small town. But it's part of the package where you go, well, these guys love rugby. It's one of the best atmospheres you can get in French rugby is breathe when they're going well. They were 1997 European Cup champions. And just, yeah, it comes with it. And Pour de Deux is superb. It's just a shame also, again, TV broadcast that it's not shown outside of France.
Yeah, as we speak, maybe Rugby Pass TV might be listening and might pick it up, because I know of a couple of friends of the pod, for instance, who are Welsh or Irish or whatever, who'd be dying to sit down the Thursday evening and watch games legally, I suppose is the word that we can use on that one. But you just kind of got me thinking there about like the likes of Breve who are in it, and they've rich history. Biarritz have been in it, Perpignan have been in it. So many clubs with rich history in the league is massive as well. And like they're able to generate crowds because they're rugby towns. Like even from an Irish perspective, I'd say the provinces get less than 40 sellouts per year, which is still unbelievable compared to, say, Welsh teams or Scottish teams. But considering Ireland is the kind of what's put up against France, it pales in comparison in some regards as well, which is remarkable. And that kind of brings me on to what the rest of the other competing nations can do. What can the RFU do, IRFU, WRU, from what can they take from France? Because they have a lot of things going for them that other teams can't replicate. As I said, like 28 professional teams, no one else can do that. But Illtud, there's definitely pieces of the puzzle that if you're, IRFU or WRU chiefs, you should be looking at, and you should be trying to, not copy, but replicate in some regard.
I don't want to correct you publicly, but it's not 28 professional teams, because if you add in how many teams in National, I think it's about 10 or 12, they're all pretty professional. And in National 2, which is meant to be semi-pro, but I know some guys there are on pro deals. So you're just thinking like there's 50 odd clubs who are professional, who've got like incredible setups, who've got like stadiums that are like being built left, right, and center. So yeah, it's incredible. I started writing out a list of what people could copy and impress, but it ended up just being like everything. And a big thing, a part of me, what is maybe league structure, how the top 14 is simple. And the Pour de Deux simple, just home and away legs, you play against everyone. And yet it's complicated to do that in the URC because it's 18 teams as opposed to 14 and 16. But I think what would make that simple from a Welsh perspective would be to organise an Anglo-Welsh league. I won't get into the fine details, but I just think doing that would then, you would be able to copy a bit what the French succeed in, which is having a simple structure, having away fans, having a good broadcast deal, having people watching on TV and also in the ground, and then also sponsoring and marketing, because it's much easier for, local companies to say, yes, I'll sponsor Toulouse when they know that Castres are just on the road, so people who are watching Castres can also invest in whatever that company are doing. Similarly, what some of Cardiff or a Bath game would be able to market and sponsor, etc., etc. So yeah, there's a long list of things, and I think it's probably worth doing a PhD on it.
Yeah, potentially, but I'm not going to be the one to write a PhD on it. But it's funny, you mentioned the Anglo-Welsh League, and I know you're Welsh, and that's something that interests you. My lukewarm, hot, cold take, I don't know what temperature it is that if I'm a Premiership club, I only want the Welsh if the Irish are in it as well, because traveling sport, it's the kind of support you wouldn't get off, say, Glasgow and Edinburgh, for instance. It's consistent as well, but that's a different conversation for a more politically aligned podcast than this one. Paula, have you anything that stands out to you that the RFU, WRU, RFU could take on? Because again, you can't produce like so many players as much as they do, but there has to be something that you can copy.
Yeah, I mean, each country has their own ways of producing players, and that's one thing that, yeah, you certainly look to what some of the others are doing. I mean, some of what's succeeded for France has been looking at what England were doing 10, 15 years ago with kind of the GIF rules weren't dissimilar to kind of some of the stuff being done in England. And when Rob Andrew, for example, was in charge of the RFU and Stuart Lancaster was doing some of the kind of the age group stuff, that looked like it was far ahead of what's happening in France. It's such a different kind of rugby landscape that there are some things that just won't make any difference. Like the GIF rules don't really apply to anyone else other than maybe England, and England doesn't have that much of an issue with kind of overseas players. I would say trying to work on the match day experience would certainly be one thing. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but it is just something that's completely different. It's closer to a football experience in some ways, kind of the fervor that they managed to bring around it, and how much you can manufacture that, I don't know, but it is cool when you've got the drums and the songs and kind of people being serenaded into the ground. And I don't know, Harlequins do that a little bit if they're going from the Stoop to Twickenham or something, but it's not quite the same as when you see kind of thousands of people there to kind of send the Toulouse team off at the airport before they fly to London for a Champions Cup final, or La Rochelle similar when they've gone gone off to Paris for a top 14 final or something like that. And so I think there's certainly parts of it that can be done there. As Illtud mentions, yeah, away support is huge. I'd be interested to know if say Ireland did come across, how much Irish away support is there week to week in the league. That's what I'm not sure, because I guess it's also difficult, isn't it? Because you've got the interpros, you've got the home games, and then it's not cheap to go to Wales or to go to Scotland, and certainly not if you want to go to South Africa.
I think one of the highest ones of recent times was I think something like 4,000 Munster fans in Toulon back in January. I know it's Champions Cup and it's going to Toulon in January time from the west of Ireland, kind of. So there's that, but I think that's kind of like the maximum you'd be getting to.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenging part, which is just it's mainly geographical, isn't it? It's what makes it so complicated. It's the same reason that having the South African teams in the Champions Cup is like as good as they are. That's such an awkward one, because you can get it in a league structure, but week to week, when you have suddenly 1 week knockout games and someone has to go an entire continent or an entire hemisphere, it is tough. So there are parts that are going to be tough to try and work out solutions, and there probably aren't perfect ones. But I think, yeah, there are little things. And I know, for example, the French national team, the matchday experience didn't used to be amazing. Like the Stade de France used to feel quite a cold place, but they've obviously worked really hard on. It's funny because some of it is like, oh, it's almost like a nightclub. It's the music they have beforehand, and people think, oh, that's what I hate about sporting events when they try and do all of that. But they've managed to do it in a way that it feels like they build the atmosphere, they get people excited without you thinking, oh God, why am I listening to Neil Diamond again? Or why am I listening to whatever music because someone's just being patched up for something? And they seem to have found a balance, and they've worked really hard on what they can do for that match day experience. So I'd say that is something to be looked at, because there are some certainly in the UK which are quite good fun, but then there are others where it is a bit of a struggle. There's not a lot going on, and you have to be a real rugby fan to be desperate to go along. Whereas I think in France you can get people who are like, I just want to go for the event, and people who are going to a game in Bordeaux is a fantastic experience, regardless of whether you're particularly interested in the rugby. And that's what you want to sell people on, more than just, oh, you need to go and watch this Glasgow v Connacht game because the Warriors are amazing. You ought to be saying, well, Scotstoun's also amazing to go to, and that's why you should get along.
No, I absolutely agree. And like event versus match has kind of been a debate that's, I think since COVID has kind of popped up a bit more, because obviously you need to get more people in through the gates. Absolutely. Like no doubt about that. And I was at the recent college football game that took place in Ireland, and you talk about events, like they get it. And yeah, like, you know, Sweet Caroline being played by a brass band it's something. It's not for everyone. But again, like that's where nighttime games kick in, and maybe that helps. And you know, those 8 p.m. Sunday night games around 9 p.m. local time, they're a staple of top 14, and that's not something you can just create. I know Ulster and Glasgow, who you mentioned there, Glasgow, they've been great for Friday night games, and that consistency helps. Absolutely. There's so many different factors, but atmosphere, match day experience, and you know, maybe are we spoiled that there's too many games on TV? Is that potentially a factor over here? I don't know. Like it is great and all, but maybe that's a factor. I missed 1 or 2 Munster games on my season ticket that maybe I wouldn't miss if I couldn't see them anywhere else. But lads, it's been great to look over all of that stuff. But the top 14 season starts about 2 days from now as this goes out, if I remember correctly. So I do want to kind of jump into predictions and how it's going to go. There's so many storylines. Like I have Bordeaux, can they bounce back? I spoke to Noel McNamara. That episode went out during the week, and they're determined to make sure they're not in the same boat as, say, Montpellier of last year, for instance. Can La Rochelle revive? Can Toulouse go again? You know, Racing and their signings. Stad, can they follow up on a big season? Illtud, I'll start with yourself. Like, again, so many stories, but how do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, I'm most excited to see someone like Van in the top 14, to be honest with you, to see what rugby can do for Brittany and what Brittany can do for rugby. I watched Van play in a Pod de Deux semi-final a few years ago in Brive on a Sunday afternoon. I think it's something like 1,000 kilometers away, and they had like about 100 fans make that journey a week on when they didn't even know they would be there, with their bagpipes, massive flags, black and white like Breton flag Grenadier everywhere, and it'd be so cool to see them, and they get that massive bumper, glorious first home game against Toulouse, 9 p.m. on the Saturday night, which is just. I've got goosebumps now, and it's like I'm not even Breton, I don't even like Toulouse, but I just think it'll be really cool to see how that turns out. And then when it comes to the rest, the other 13 teams, yeah, Bordeaux-Bègles, I thought last year they'd show that what they were capable of doing against the final, but that was an absolute hammering they suffered. So they need to react well. And an addition like Joey Carberry could be very handy when Mathieu Jalibert is away with the French setup. And then Racing 92 with Owen Farrell, who's part of the big English influx. I think off the top of my head, is about 12 players, English international players, will in the top 14 next year. I think you're missing a hooker and a second one, a winger. So the English influx will be a big part of it as well. And then I've got a little soft spot for Stade Francais, really, just because kind of my local club, I guess. And the pink jerseys and everything how they revolutionised rugby. It would be cool to see them get another boucle d'Ouvergness, but I just don't think they have the firepower of someone like a Racing, Uber, Toulouse, or even La Rochelle, who are similar to Toulouse. They haven't done too much recruitment and saying O'Gara hasn't shuffled his pack too much. He just knows what he's got from his team, and I expect from La Rochelle a big reaction this season.
I suppose the one thing about La Rochelle and the fact they were in Leinster's room as we watched them a bit more last year was they probably did look to go through periods of probably being tired and out in their feet, which is understandable. They a long, couple of years, but then next year is probably when we'll see a real revival, a new spark with the kind of signings that they've been linked to. You mentioned the Racing, English input. Paul, I'll let you kind of kick on the excitement in terms of who you're looking forward to see, because as Illtud out, like there's so many new faces, there's so many storylines. It's really on a knife edge as we approach the new season.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting to watch, and other than Dupont, it feels, because most of those internationals obviously don't go on the summer tours these days. There's a lot of guys we've not seen in a long time, or even someone like Ntamack, who we saw a little bit at the end of last season, but it'd be nice to see him back in kind of full flow. I kind of feel like there's a trio who are not have separated themselves, but obviously Toulouse are the class of the league, but I feel like Bordeaux and La Rochelle are the two who can really challenge them. Maybe Racing kind of bounce back from a tough season. I still think their pack is a little underpowered compared to the absolute elite. I would say one team I think are flying a little under the radar are Toulon, who I think when everyone's available, which isn't always, but when everyone's available, I think they've got a team that can cause pretty much everyone a lot of problems. I'm quite excited to see Gabisi get a full year as fly half there. I know obviously Dan Big is still going, but Gabisi looked good when he kind of had his second half of the season there, finally getting his opportunity after a pretty ropey time at Montpellier. And so I think they could be interesting. And then, yeah, I mean, Van will be fantastic to watch. I saw some sparks from Clermont last season. It'd be quite nice to see if they could build on that. I'm not sure if they will, but when Clermont play good rugby, that's about as exciting as it is to watch rugby. It seems like an incredible place to go, and it's been a bit of a sad sight seeing them fall off in the last few years. So if they can come back, that would be nice. I'm not sure that they'll be anywhere near the very top, but and then yeah, I think it's just there's so many exciting young players to watch as well. Whether it's Poe, who have brought through a lot of good youngsters, even going down further to the Pod de Deux and Brive, who we mentioned, like they've got a few of the guys from the French under-20 squad who played very well recently, and it'd be quite nice to see them alongside a Laws or something like that. So there's just so much I'm excited to see.
Absolutely, and maybe I know it wasn't something I planned on to, but talking about, but you just reminded me there, Montpellier is a really interesting one because top 14 champions 2 years ago, I think it was, or maybe three, I can't remember which. But now, like, they were bottom of the top 14 for ages. They've signed very strangely, I think it's fair to say. If we just leave it at that, whichever you want to take it, like what is going on at Montpellier? I think people would be asking.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, I think the recruitment is certainly not the recruitment of a club that's desperate to be loved, shall we say? And
Yes, thank you.
they've got, I mean, Bernard Laporte running the rugby side of things. He's obviously got strong ties to Mohamed Altrad from the involvement with the kind of the sponsorship of the French national team, and it's been lots of chopping and changing. The squad is still very strong. I mean, some players probably at the wrong end of their careers, or in some cases have come back out of retirement. There's enough strength that they shouldn't be going down, but I'm finding it hard to imagine that they're going to turn things around and suddenly be challenging that far up the table either, because there doesn't seem to be a coherent vision, and there seems to be chopping and changing with coaches every single year. I mean, I was looking when Leo McDonald obviously left the All Blacks. I thought, oh, I wonder where he could turn up in France. What would be the first job that'd be available? And then I was like, well, of course it'd be Montpellier, because it just seems that that is the first job available there in every season in France is there. And so, yeah, it feels like there's no consistency, there's no structure, there's no vision. So we will see. There's a lot of talent, there's a lot of money, so they could be good, but it's hard to see the case for them really kind of bouncing back.
I can maybe not echo that sentiment because I haven't read up on it, but I do agree with what you're saying. And like, look, it's probably going to be a cracking season, lads. But Illtud, I'll start with yourself. Who do you see winning the top 14? But kind of your top six, thereabouts. How do you see it going? And is there anyone we should look out for, teams or players?
I think Toulouse will finish first, will be in that first or second straight into the semi-final spot. And then a bit like what Paul said, Bordeaux-Bègles, La Rochelle will be second. And then, yeah, Toulon at the moment, they always seem to be like, oh, actually, they could do something because they've got some French stalwarts in there with mixed international talent. But it's similar to Montpellier, they're just a bit of a basket case of a club, really. And then I think I really like Paul, really, because Sebastian Piquionne has got a nice little thing going on there where he's picked a lot of young players, French players who he knows quite well. And then he's just dotted in around like someone like Joe Simmons, just kicking the points, getting on with his work quite nicely. And I've also got a soft spot for Bayonne because the atmosphere there is fantastic, and they just signed some players I really enjoy watching, like Joey Segond, who might end up being first choice now with Camille Lopez still getting a bit older. And then I just love watching Sorelli Makala play when he's fit, because when he is on his game, I think he's one of the most exciting players to watch. And yeah, in front of a crowd like that, it's just superb. So yeah, Toulouse top one, top two, but I don't know if they could win it again, just because I think I prefer seeing a bit of difference in sport, and whoever wins. Otherwise, sport gets boring, doesn't it?
I mean, history is a bit of fun until it's done, and then you can kind of sweep it to the side, I suppose. There's that side. Paul, I'll let you close things out. Who do you see winning the top 14, and what's your kind of top six, your teams to watch, players to watch?
I mean, it's hard to look past Toulouse, although I don't think anyone has won 3 in a row since their team of the 90s. So you're going back quite a long time. So it does take a lot to do that. I wouldn't be stunned in a one-off game if a La Rochelle or Bordeaux or maybe a Toulon, if they're in the right position, could upset them. My guess is I think it'll be them. They'll be one of the top two, and I think probably La Rochelle, a bit of a bounce back season. I think Bordeaux will be there or thereabouts. Toulon, I like Illtud Shout of Poe. I think they could be very interesting. It depends about the Ohadou situation, because I think he was going to be quite important, and who knows what's going to happen with him. But that is a big loss if you think that also Sam Whitelock obviously left at the end of the season. So both arguably first choice, second choice from last season missing. But in terms of players to watch, there's a young guy at Toulouse called Calvin Gourc, who is a fullback, stroke centre, stroke fly half, who knows if he'll get much game time because they've obviously got so many options, especially fullbacks. But he was an absolute beast for the under-18s 2 years ago. He'll be under-20 this season, but he looks like he's a real talent. And then there's a few other guys kind of dotted around. Castro Ferreira, as we mentioned. And then, yeah, they'll be interesting to see as well. Andy Timo, who was part of the under-20s 2 years ago, won the World Championships and then was part of the Olympics and was one of the key players in the Sevens team that won the final. Like in the final, he had a really big impact. He's kind of, they always talk about him as like a Makalu next gen kind of dynamic flanker, incredibly quick, obviously plays at Stade Francais as well. So I'd quite like to see how he gets on at 15s, kind of given a full whack this time, like really going for it. I think he could be pretty special. So I think those guys will be fun. And then seeing who gets integrated into the national team as well, whether we see a Gailleton or a De Porter or all these guys we've seen flashes of, but get a bit more opportunity.
It promises to be an unbelievable season. I don't have official confirmation, but I'm pretty sure it is on Premier Sports here in Ireland. Just waiting on official. It's on their website, so we'll take that as being fairly official. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me, to Illtud and to Paul. It's been definitely an interesting conversation to have with the 2E, and adds a bit of context to why the French are knocking us out of Europe every year, or at least it feels like it. Thanks home to everyone for listening as well. Of course, just the start of a busy month of rugby, lots of news, previews, interviews, the whole shebang. And you can catch me on the new United Rugby Rewind pod for all things URC. I'll have the link for that below. If you do like what you see here, please do subscribe, leave a review. Thanks again to everyone for listening and to the two lads for coming on. But until next time, au revoir.